Welcome to Today in History, your daily AI podcast. Here, you'll discover what made this day special, from famous events and breakthroughs to the birthdays and passing anniversaries of legendary figures. So, let's check in and travel back through time one day at a time.
Our mission here is synthesizing complex sources, offering you the context and the key insights you need to truly understand the world around you. We don't just summarize.
And today, we're focusing on one specific date, October 10th. It's a date that, across different continents, different cultures, really became a fault line for profound change. We're looking at a day defined by foundations, suddenly shifting, violently.
We've got two very different sources on the table. One is, it's a dense technical engineering report on that awful 1980 El Aznem earthquake in Algeria.
Right. And the other source is a collection of historical and political notes looking at Double 10 Day, which is a major commemoration in East Asia.
So our goal here is to take these two October 10th events, one literal failure of the earth, of concrete, the other the collapse of a centuries-old political system, and figure out what they tell us about foundational integrity.
And maybe more importantly, why having good rules, good codes just doesn't mean anything if you don't actually follow through and enforce them.
Okay, let's lay out the basics first. October 10th, 1980. It's 1:25 p.m. local time, and a magnitude 7.3 earthquake hits near El Aznem in Algeria.
Yeah, the city later got renamed Exshelif. Population back then, about 125,000 people.
And the impact.
Immediate, catastrophic. The death toll was just horrifying, somewhere between 5,000 and maybe even up to 20,000 people killed.
Wow.
And the reports are really clear on this, that massive loss of life was overwhelmingly because modern buildings collapsed, not just, old huts or something. These were contemporary structures.
Okay, now rewind 69 years earlier, same date, October 10th, 1911.
This is the Wuchang Uprising, the spark, really, that set off the Xinhai Revolution.
And that revolution,
Right.
That's what led to the end of the Qing dynasty, right? And the founding of the Republic of China, the ROC, in 1912.
Exactly. So you've got this physical disaster wiping out buildings in North Africa and a political earthquake creating a new state in Asia, all sharing the same date on the calendar. Let's start with the literal ground shaker.
Right, the seismic disaster.
Yeah.
So the El Aznem quake, the report says it was caused by movement on the Oued Fata thrust fault. For those of us not familiar, what exactly is a thrust fault in simple terms?
Well, think of it like two huge blocks of the Earth's crust colliding. In a thrust fault, one block is literally forced up and rides over the adjacent block. It's an immense release of pressure.
And El Aznem city was pretty close to the rupture.
Yeah, about 7 kilometers away from where the fault actually broke the surface. And critically, this wasn't a surprise fault system.
Ah, right. It caused another big quake back in 1954.
Exactly. So the danger zone was known. And this is where it gets, really interesting for our deep dive. The engineers writing this report, they emphasized the disaster wasn't just because the shaking was severe.
Which it was, right? They estimated acceleration strong enough to basically throw things around violently.
Oh, yeah. Definitely over 0.4 gram horizontally, maybe even higher vertically. But the main point was widespread, frankly avoidable human failures in design and construction.
Failures made after the 1954 warning.
Precisely. The engineers looked at the rubble and saw a city basically built to fail again. It seems to boil down to maybe 3 key problems, conceptual weaknesses that were introduced during the rebuilding.
Okay, let's start with the biggest one. The report calls it the soft story failure. What was that?
So the soft story failure was probably the single biggest reason for the collapses. It comes from this common design feature they used called the vide sanitaire.
The sanitary void, like a crawl space.
Exactly. A crawl space usually at ground level. Now imagine taking a heavy multi-story brick or concrete building, but instead of putting it on a solid foundation, you rest it on these short, kind of stubby columns, maybe only a meter tall.
Okay.
And crucially, there were no stiff walls down there in that crawl space to brace those little columns, the floors above. They did have stiff masonry walls.
So it was like putting a heavy box on, braced stilts.
That's a good way to put it. Or like you said before, soda cans. The moment the earthquake's horizontal forces hit, all that energy concentrated right on those short, unbraced columns at the bottom.
And they just snapped.
They sheared right off, easily. The whole building would just drop suddenly or tilt over dramatically, sometimes 20 degrees or more, even while the upper floors looked almost undamaged from the outside. It's terrifying.
So a fundamental design concept failure? But you said there were other issues. Materials, too. The report mentions unconfined concrete.
Yeah, that's the second major failure area. Poor materials and what engineers call detailing. Concrete needs steel reinforcing bars, sure, but the concrete core itself needs to be held together tightly.
How do you do that?
With smaller steel hoops or ties. It's called transverse reinforcement. Think of them like a belt cinching the concrete core tight, especially under crushing pressure.
Oh.
And El Asnam, in so many collapsed buildings, those ties were just inadequate, too far apart, not anchored correctly, sometimes just missing where they were needed most.
So when the shaking started, the concrete core, without that belt, essentially just burst outwards.
That's what happened. It couldn't contain the stress. And the concrete itself was often weak. Tests on samples from the rubble showed compressive strengths, sometimes less than half 45% of what the design minimum required.
Why was it so weak?
Often dirty aggregate, the sand and gravel in the mix, or poorly graded, maybe not enough fine sand, or the gravel pieces were too large, just bad quality control.
Unbelievable. And the third conceptual flaw, heavy roofs. That sounds counterintuitive for an earthquake zone.
It does, doesn't it? But they did it for thermal insulation. They used these really thick, heavy, reinforced concrete roof slabs. And then on top of that, they layered loose material like crushed bricks or gravel.
So massive weight right at the top.
Exactly, which just made the earthquake forces worse, especially sitting on top of that weak soft story foundation. They also found other problems, like structural irregularities.
Like what?
Things like putting strong beams on weak columns or placing really stiff elements like concrete elevator shafts off to one side asymmetrically.
Which would cause the building to twist.
Right. Introduce huge torsional forces that could literally twist a building apart or off its foundation.
Just a catalog of errors. The report even uses collapsed school canopies to figure out how strong the shaking was.
Yeah, that's a fascinating detail. These were simple structures, like an upside-down pendulum, a heavy roof on a single column, easy enough to model mathematically.
And they confirmed the strong shaking, 0.35 to 0.55 G.
They did, but the damage told a deeper story. Some canopies just collapsed instantly. Okay, strong shaking confirmed. But others, almost identical, survived.
Ow.
Only because they were built right next to the main, stiffer school building. As they started to sway, they literally hammered against the adjacent building, which stopped them from falling over.
So the shaking was survivable if the structure was properly braced or designed.
That's the implication. If the basic conceptual design and detailing had been sound, many buildings could have stood up much better.
Which makes the history here the real tragedy. They rebuilt after the '54 quake. They even wrote a seismic code, AS 1955.
Yeah.
But 26 years later, modern buildings, supposedly built to that code, failed catastrophically. It sounds like the code itself was maybe not good enough, or,
and this seems more likely from the report, the fundamental principles behind seismic design weren't properly understood, applied, or critically enforced. It was a failure of execution, of follow-through.
that failure of execution. It feels like a good bridge to the second event.
I think so too. If the soft story was the physical weak point in El Asnam, maybe there's a conceptual soft spot in the political structure tied to October 10th, Double 10 Day.
Okay, let's make that pivot. The political upheaval. October 10th, Double 10 Day.
So this day celebrates the Wuchang Uprising in 1911. That was the event that really kicked off the revolution leading to the Republic of China, the ROC.
And today it's mainly celebrated in Taiwan.
Primarily, yes. That's where the ROC government relocated after the Chinese Civil War ended in 1949.
And right there, that's sort of the inherent tension, isn't it? The ROC was founded in 1912, mainland China. But Taiwan itself was actually under Japanese rule at that time?
Exactly. So the holiday commemorates a revolution that happened elsewhere and didn't directly involve the island of Taiwan until decades later when the ROC government arrived.
That historical distance creates a kind of structural tension in the identity being celebrated.
It does. You see huge public celebrations, flag-raising ceremonies, often large military parades in Taipei, right in front of the presidential office building. But what exactly is being celebrated is often debated.
How so?
Well, there's this ongoing friction. Some strongly adhere to calling it the National Day of the Republic of China. Others prefer phrasing like Taiwan National Day, reflecting the current political reality and distinct identity of the island.
So the political soft story here is maybe this contested foundation, a history that doesn't quite align smoothly with the present-day political identity for everyone.
I think that's a good way to frame it. And you see this reflected in how the traditions around the celebration itself have changed over time.
Like the parades.
Like the parades, yeah. they haven't always gone smoothly. There was a terrible tragedy in 1964. Two F-104 fighter jets actually collided during the flypast.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, killing both pilots and, tragically, 3 people on the ground, including a child. The parade was actually canceled for several years after that.
But more recently, the changes have been more subtle, more political.
Definitely. In 2016, something quite significant happened. For the first time, the tradition of ending the president's speech with the rousing chant, "Long live the Republic of China," was just omitted.
That feels deliberate.
It signals a shift, perhaps, an attempt to subtly adjust that political foundation, maybe reframe the state's identity. And that same year, 2016, another tradition changed.
What was that?
The parade itself. It stopped being exclusively military. Personnel from civilian uniformed services, firefighters, police officers, they joined the parade ranks for the first time.
Broadening the definition of the state being represented, less purely military or historical party state.
Perhaps moving towards a more contemporary civilian state structure, it reflects that ongoing negotiation of identity.
And the fragility, or maybe the contested nature, of this specific political foundation really comes into focus when you look at how October 10th is treated elsewhere, globally.
Absolutely. It's highly contested territory. Mainland China, the People's Republic of China, PRC, they acknowledged October 10th, but only as the anniversary of the Xinhai Revolution.
So they celebrate the end of the Qing dynasty, but definitely not the founding of the rival ROC state.
Precisely. Meanwhile, in some overseas Chinese communities, especially those with historical ties to the ROC.
Like in the U.S., San Francisco, Chicago.
Exactly. You still see quite large parades. It's almost a nostalgic link for some, keeping that specific ROC tradition alive, maybe reflecting the support those communities gave to the revolution generations ago.
But then you look at Hong Kong or Macau.
And it's a completely different story since the sovereignty transfers. Before 1997 or 1999, you'd see ROC flags displayed publicly for Double 10. That was common.
Yeah.
Now, public displays of the ROC flag on that day are often removed by police. Any celebrations are heavily restricted or actively reframed to fit the PRC's narrative, just the anniversary of the Xinhai Revolution. The foundation is being actively altered, you could say, by an external force to match a different political design.
So this one date, October 10th, really does capture both the raw power of a physical geological shift in Algeria and the deep ongoing friction of a political identity shift in East Asia, both fundamentally stories about the integrity of foundations.
And the common thread, the lesson running through both the engineering report and the historical notes, it seems to be about the critical gap between having rules and actually enforcing them, following through.
In El Asnam, the strong shaking was met by designs that failed in their execution and their detailing. They had a code, maybe not perfect, but they failed on the basics, the concrete quality, the column reinforcement, the whole soft story concept.
It wasn't necessarily a failure of knowledge, was it? It feels more like a failure of discipline, of implementation.
Which brings us to that counterexample you mentioned earlier, San Juan, Argentina.
Right. San Juan provides such a stark contrast. It was devastated by huge earthquakes twice, 1894 and 1944. Total destruction.
Okay.
After that 1944 disaster, they developed a seismic code. Apparently, it was relatively simple, nothing super advanced, but it was based on sound principles.
And the key difference was?
The key difference was it was strictly enforced for almost 30 years. Building inspections, quality control, adherence to the code.
So when the next big one hit?
In 1977, another major quake, magnitude 7.4, struck San Juan again, and the result, the newer buildings, the ones built under that strictly enforced code, they generally performed very well. Minimal damage, comparatively. The major failures were mostly in older structures or where enforcement had reportedly become lax again in later years.
It wasn't about fancy technology then. It was about consistently applying the fundamentals.
Exactly that. Proper detailing, quality control, conceptual soundness. That's what saved the newer parts of the city.
So the lesson from both October 10th events, the earthquake and the uprising's anniversary, seems to be that robust systems, whether we're talking about buildings or political structures or even organizations, they need more than just good plans or laws on paper.
They absolutely demand rigorous adherence to those foundational principles. That proper detailing, whether it's how you tie steel in a concrete column or how you navigate a complex national identity. Without that follow-through, you create a soft story waiting to collapse.
Which leaves us, and you, with a final thought to consider as we wrap up this deep dive. In a world that feels increasingly unstable, both physically with climate change and politically, How many potential catastrophes are brewing right now? Not because we lack the knowledge or the rules to prevent them.
But because we're failing, collectively perhaps, to enforce the proper detailing, failing to ensure the quality control and the fundamental soundness of the systems we rely on every day.
That's all for today's episode of Today in History. Thanks for listening. Join us again tomorrow to uncover more moments that shaped our world. Until then, keep learning, stay curious, and make history in your own way.